Welcome to the February session of Dr. Spotfire. My name's Neil Kanungo, and I will be your host today. With Dr. Spotfire, as always, our motto is learning is not driven by answers, but by questions. Today's session, I'm very excited to introduce Erik Brandin and Olof Bjerke. They are two Spotfire developers, two engineers from the Spotfire team in Sweden. It's my pleasure to introduce them today. They're going to go over extending the mods framework, extending mods usage outside of the mods framework, and doing some more kind of action-oriented type tasks. Now, I was just talking with a colleague last week about this, and mods is useful for creating new visualizations and custom visualizations, but there's also something we call quality of life improvements, things that just help you with your day-to-day work, things that you can already do in Spotfire, but it might be difficult to reproduce. Maybe there's a lot of configuration in a text area. Maybe it requires a lot of coding and it's not easily accessible to people that are not familiar with coding principles or coding skills. And so mods can be used to really just package up a lot of those ease of use type of things, those reusable type templates and actions, and share them with your organization. So Erik and Olof are going to show that and show some of the extent capabilities of Spotfire. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Erik and Olof.
Yeah, so my name is Erik Brandin. As Neil said, I'm a developer. And when I don't develop, I usually like to bake Naples-style pizza for my family, and I also like to ride my mountain bikes. And Olof, I think,
yes, I'm a developer also in the visual analytics team, and I'm a climber, and I'm not such a devout pizza fan as Erik, but I'm definitely a sourdough baker. So that's what I like to do.
Oh, you have to have the Naples style pizza then. Yes. We are going to talk a little bit more about mods. There have been two Dr. Spotfire sessions on mods already by Andrew Berridge. We would like to go a little bit further. He did excellent introduction, and yeah. But to recap what mods are, you want to do that, Olof?
Yes. So mods are lightweight extension points in Spotfire, and they are shareable and reusable in your library, and they work across all clients and different environments that Spotfire exists in. And in its core, a mod is a sandboxed static website. So it has a HTML page, some CSS, some JavaScript, maybe images, maybe even a video. And most importantly, it has a JavaScript library called the Mods API, which it loads into and which it can communicate with Spotfire, which is wrapped around the mod itself. And the thought about mods is that it should be easy to get started. And you can think of it that you can take a D3 visualization, connect it to the mods API, and to bring in data from Spotfire instead of a static JSON file or something like that. And the spectrum of mods is very large, I would say. It's everything from one of those static websites containing only a company logo. It can be a UI control to navigate pages in a Spotfire document. It can be something very, very simple to display some form of data that is dynamic. And it can be all the way to a Spotfire class visualization, adapting to each kind of data that you can throw at it. So what we're looking at here right now is a mod, for example. And it can contain text, which you can style. We don't care about the styling inside of this mod because it's sandboxed. And if you click through it, you go to an image, and that image itself is also contained in the mod. The mod itself has a manifest, a JSON file that declares to Spotfire what that mod contains, like each file that it needs to be able to be rendered. So all of those files are consumed by Spotfire and stored inside a document. And if Erik continues here, we can see that it's not only images, it's also that we can go to video, for example.
Yeah, we can also mention that this, for you who don't know who this is, Hans Rosling is the founder of a foundation or an organization called Gapminder. He used visual analytics a lot in his active years to describe how the world was developing. So there's quite a lot of this. Now this is an embedded video from YouTube showing one of his famous TED Talks. So this is an animated bubble chart. And then of course we needed to replicate this inside a mod. So these are just, now we can click, and this will navigate us to the next page in this analysis, which contains this mod. This is an animated bubble chart. So it will, it has quite a lot of axes. The x-axis shows the fertility rate, and the y-axis life expectancy. And all the bubbles are countries, different countries, and we do have tooltips here. So this is the United States, and it's for one specific year, 1962. And the size is the population at that time. And then we have a play button and a timeline down here. So this is basically, you can see it in Spotfire, it could be like a trellised scatter plot. But here we can animate, and we can drag this and show that, well, see what happens during over the time, or we can just use play button, and it will animate smoothly how all these countries develop over this time. I also wish we added some. We can make the animation a little bit faster, and all this. And yeah, you can see something happened there. Cambodia happened something in the 80s. So you can see things from history and learn from that as well. So this kind of adds quite a lot of analytic capabilities. So how is that made then? We can go into the code. Just quickly, this is a D3, an animated D3 visualization. So, and these how the mod looks internally, Andrew showed quite a lot. So we can dive into the Spotfire initialize call, which is the starting point of every mod. And it will here read quite a lot of both axes and mod properties. Should there be log scales? What is the animation speed? Do you want to show the labels? And the first one is the data. So it's quite a lot of things that we depend upon when rendering this visualization. And we could also show here, if we just live code a little bit, that the mod API contains quite a lot. It contains everything that has to do with the visualization, but also mod properties that is embedded in this instance of the mod. But we can also reach out, as we'll discuss further later during this presentation, into the document. For example, a document property, like the description. So this part of the API, or this mod API, then you can update directly from this if you want to have some code that updates whatever you may have. And you can also, the same object can also read the data. So you can say something like a description equals await dot value, and TypeScript or Visual Studio Code adds a little bit more await than I need, but nevertheless you can get. Now we do have this description as a string, but we also need to to subscribe to changes in Spotfire, of course. We want to have Spotfire work exactly to work with undo, and if you mark or change anything else in the document. That's why we create a reader. So the reader acts like it will.
Erik,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but what you were just showing with description, can you explain what it was that you were doing? You were showing us. What is this?
Okay. Yeah. The first one is if you actually want to update any part of the analysis. So this part actually will, if you would do like this, my description, this will be the exact same thing as if you would go into the properties dialog, the document properties dialog, and add a description on this visualization.
So the actual visualization description that people would normally type in.
The analysis. Yeah, the analysis.
The analysis.
Yeah.
So the DXP file.
Yeah, the DXP file, exactly. So you can change. You can change states in the analysis file, but you can also react to changes.
Okay. So,
yeah, so it's worth noting here. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So what Erik does here when he sets readable, which we call them in the API directly, means that all that you can enter into your reader, like visualization data, window size, mod properties, they can be read individually without a reader. But the main point of the reader is having the ability to react to changes when an undo step happens, when a mod property is updated, markings, and to gather all those together. But we still operate on those kinds of objects when we want to read something individually.
So this is a key part of listening to the actions that are happening in the DXP that are outside, maybe even outside the visualization, right?
Yes,
yes,
absolutely.
Exactly. So like if this property, for example, the mod property, that is contained inside this instance of the mod. But when I wrote mod.document, that is the document is the DXP file. Then we reach outside the mod itself, and then you can actually use kind of document properties to actually interact between different instances of two mods. And you can set these document properties, and I know there are a lot of different workarounds to support different use cases among our customers, that they have ways of modifying document properties when they load an analysis or when they do something in their guided analysis. And that for some of those use cases, mods could probably be used instead. But as Olof said, the main part of this reader is to collect several of these readables, these states in the mod or in the DXP, and subscribe to any changes in those. So this reader, it will subscribe to all these properties that we entered up there, and this subscribe method, asynchronous subscribe method, will be invoked every time any of these changes. And the reader is clever enough to know what part was changed. Is it the Y log scale or the X log scale? And it will only give you a new value of these arguments for those values that are changed. So you could, if you want to know exactly what changed, you could store these arguments and check them for reference equality every time this subscribe callback is invoked. It's on the more advanced side, but if we have seen cases where mod developers tries to create several readers and subscribe in different read loops and have different callback methods, and then they need to synchronize the rendering because they want to, okay, I want to do something when data view changes, but I want to do something else if a mod property changes or a document property changes, and then it's very hard to get it's hard to beat this reader to make it faster and more efficient, because that's already being built into this reader object. But apart from that, if we go on into the core content of the visualization, it looks basically like anything else. We do have a limit sometime because it's client-side rendered, so we don't want to end up in a state where we starve the browser. And we also do have here some if there's a lot of data and you mark or filter while we are reading the data, this reading all the data will be cancelled. If I hover over here, it says that, okay, it gets all the rows and it will return, let's see here, returns null if reading data was aborted at the bottom. So now if this is kind of, okay, I don't know if it's clever or it's one way to make sure that all data was read. So then we don't need to care about that later, because the data is being cached on the client side. So if I would like to do this again and read all the data, nothing will be transferred from the server. So everything now is cached on the client side. But then we could go into the render, which is in another file. So we do have some the interesting part here. This is D3. It will, and I know you talked a little bit in previous sessions about how D3 works. Here we create from the marker layer, which is basically just a wrapped div element from the document. We say that we want to have markers. We want to select everything that is of a certain class in the document, all dots. And we want to, this is how you identify. We'll go into this a little bit more, but that's how you identify the different visual elements between two updates. And the D3 has the enter method that will, okay, all the new dots, all the new visual elements will be rendered here with the starting point of the X and Y coordinates according to the data row. There are continuous values, X and Y, and it will have radius 0 and it will be transparent, so it won't be visible. But then we do for all dots, we update them and we make them into a transition. And in that transition, we move them to the new point. So, and we will update the radius, and if the color would change, we would update the color as well. And D3 also has an exit pass. So all the dots that exits out of this data view with the same duration, they will be faded out and transformed into just a point. So here is so how do you then identify two visual points between, in this case, between two years? So this, for example, this should be India. How do you identify those 2 points when you go between different years like this, when you scrub over the timeline? So that is basically just a very small, simple method. In Spotfire, how to identify these two visual elements is to compare all the categorical values of that row. So that now in this case, we need to check, okay, was the categorical axis now a categorical color? So this is one of the things that when you make a generic visualization in mods, there's quite a lot of things to think about. It's not very hard, but it's a lot of use cases that we want to cover to make it generic. So if the color now was categorical, then we create a key, we get the categorical value from this the color axis, and then we map it to here. Let's see here. What we don't want to do is to take the formatted value. The formatted value is used to present data to the user. But if you have Olof cubes, for example, the format, two different data points might have the same formatted value, but then we have the key, and the key is always a unique. It uniquely identifies this element. So this is what you would like to do to actually identify this categorical, the value on the categorical axis for this row. And it can be null, so we just make this into a string, so it's easier for D3 to compare. And we do the same thing with the marker by axis. But as you see here, we omit the time axis because we want to have two visual elements in two different years to have the identical key. And that's how D3 then can do the smooth transition between these two times.
Yeah, so I can add here that this is one of those examples where we need some kind of transformation here so that the Mods API doesn't really care about identifiers, but D3 does. So this is a way for us to, as in the Spotfire UI, when you have a hierarchy on your axis, the tree structure that is generated in the scale, that is what we are trying to identify through the API here, so that we find a unique point in our data view. And it's only categorical axes that generate these hierarchies. So we don't care about the continuous axes here. Those are not based as identifiers.
Can you explain a little bit more about what the hierarchies are? Are these like hierarchical columns in the data set? Is it a hierarchy as in a hierarchy axis? Or can you just explain a little more clearly what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, all categorical axes in Spotfire are not limited to just one expression. You can always add multiple expressions or multiple columns from in-memory data even if it's not a hierarchy column in Spotfire at the moment. The data view here will create a hierarchy for that axis. So basically, every categorical column or every categorical axis in the data view will generate it will generate a simple value that you can read, but the value is just the entire path to the hierarchy leaf that is generated in runtime. So if we take, if we take any bar chart here, if we in Spotfire create a bar chart, so this categorical, the x-axis, that's just a simple column here, the continent, but we could add anything here, or now these are in kind of natural hierarchy, but we could add anything here if we want to. And every point now here, this is the leaf that is the first, the continent Africa and the time 2010. So this is kind of this data point
is the leaf of that.
Is the leaf of that hierarchy. So I mean the hierarchies are kind of fundamental to all to the Spotfire data view. And
okay, thanks.
And it's worth noting here that those hierarchies that we generate, they don't always contain values. The values themselves might be filtered out, but Spotfire can still understand the structure of the data, which is the hierarchy, and then it's populated with rows, which contains the actual values of those in that hierarchical leaf. So as a good advice is to use the hierarchies when you are reading out data.
Yes, and that's also why always when you get the hierarchy, the value of a categorical axis, you see the result here is an array of data view categorical value path elements. That's a long name, but you don't always get one value, but we do have it for just presenting. We do have the formatted value, but that's purely for presentation, not for creating a key. Hopefully this will be a little bit simplified going forward. We are trying to evolve the API, but this is how you currently would need to do to identify elements, visual elements in a mod. So that's basically it. What it is animation.
If you did you want to move on to the next topic, or we're almost 30 minutes past the hour? You're welcome to keep going.
Yeah, we can keep going.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding us of the time.
Yeah.
We can evolve on this far too much. So yes. Let's continue.
Yeah. But there are a few. We'd like to just mention a few do's and don'ts that we have thought about when we have seen mods. So for one thing, we kind of prefer to use TypeScript ourselves if we can. It makes it a lot easier to get type safety when creating the mod. And if you don't, for some reason, don't want to use TypeScript, at least make sure to declare all your functions and as much as possible with the JS doc, because that at least makes it it makes it a lot easier to find silly mistakes in the code. And also, it is quite hard to if the mod gets too many categorical axes, because since all categorical axes can become hierarchies, it can be really hard to digest and by in the code reason about how to actually visualize that. And also these two parts that we get from the one more thing, the API, the declaration file and DTS file, and the mod schema. It's good to have those set up correctly in your development tool. In this case, the Visual Studio Code. It makes it a lot easier to code when you get IntelliSense.
It's worth noting here that all examples in the GitHub repo have these set up already. And it might be simple to just remove them because they are giving you red squiggles when you start off, but try to keep them because they are really helpful in the long run when you are exploring more and more of the API.
And I just put a link in the chat for the Spotfire Mods overview page in the community. That page has a link to the GitHub repo that Olof just mentioned. It also has a link to the TIBCO exchange that's pre-filtered for Spotfire Mods and shows you the latest mods that we have up, and we're continuing to get new mods posted on the exchange for you to just download and play with yourself.
Yeah. There's a few more things that we think is good to know. As I showed early on, how to read all the data through the API, and that's normally not how you do it. When reading the data, I will show you one example here. If we go to this reading the rows, so this is kind of a normal Spotfire line chart, trellis line chart that shows the amount of data that this mod actually contains. But here, if we would this is what we talked about, the year column. If we remove some of the years, Spotfire can still understand that the mod can easily know that there are times in the data, but they are now filtered out. So now 66 up to 68 is being filtered out. So now if I run this visualization again, when you get to these years, you will see all the data is fading out. And that effect that is what you expect from Spotfire. If you have holes in the hierarchy when something is filtered out, you don't want to remove that part of the scale. And now it's the animation that is that time scale. And if you would just read all the rows, the raw rows, and try to create all these time series, that would be impossible, because you don't have information in the actual row that there were actually data points for these years. So that's why in the code we have this hierarchy, the animate by hierarchy, and we get the root of that, and we get the leaves, and then further down.
I think it's a really important point, and I remember when you're showing me this when we last spoke. So if you can go back to Spotfire real quick.
Yeah.
So just to kind of reemphasize what's happening here. So Erik filtered out 1966 through 1968, but how come the chart knew to still show 1966 through 1968 without data? How come it didn't just skip over those years completely? And the reason is because of the hierarchy. So the hierarchy is kind of like a scaffolding or like a structure for the data table. And so you have that scaffolding together, but the elements within certain cells are now filtered out, but the scaffolding remains. And that's what the hierarchy does.
Exactly, and that's also something you can control in Spotfire itself. If you go to properties for this animate by axis, if you go to settings, you can select this. The axis mode is categorical, and we want to show all the values. But if we would just show the filtered values, that would kind of go back to that other way. Then this time hierarchy will actually not have any leaves for. Okay, now it's not filtered out anymore. Did I do undo? Maybe. In this case, it will skip from 65 to 68 because that's configuration in Spotfire. And that, as Neil said, the scaffolding is still there to keep those values. And how that is being done is we don't use the mod itself, the data view, to get all the rows, but we use the leaves from the hierarchy that we want to use. But then there are kind of this, when I set up this, it kind of shows that, okay, there are a lot of hierarchies involved here. We have a rows hierarchy, and we have a columns hierarchy, and we have the time, and all these data we want to get just to, in this case, maybe the data points that is in here. So how would you do that then? In this case, you would need to get, okay, this actually, the entire row, that's one leaf. That's the Asia leaf of this continent hierarchy, or the trellis by rows. And if you get the rows for this, you would get all the rows that are in this row. But then you would get kind of an orthogonal hierarchy for this, the rows, the columns hierarchy.
Jump in, Erik?
Yeah.
I think this is too deep. I think the intersection of hierarchies is complicated.
Yes,
a word of advice is to try to keep the number of categorical axes down.
Yeah.
Because understanding what rows belong to what hierarchies, it's easy to get lost in what you think you're trying to accomplish and what's actually being accomplished.
So the key takeaway is, because you have all of these leaves with your hierarchies, and that's how the categorical columns are designed. If you keep adding lots of categorical columns, that creates complications in trying to understand which rows, which elements are going to show.
Yeah, since each hierarchy is splitting the data, so it's breaking apart the values, then you need to combine them again, even though the hierarchy API gives you access to all of the rows that are part of it, but it's still, it takes some digging into the code to understand completely, and I don't think we have the time for it right now.
Yeah, we might want to move on to the, I think, what was it, the document property part, and what? Do
you have that up on your machine? Can you? Do you want to share, Olof?
I can share, but I think we can just go through a few of the. Erik did some do's he wanted to say, but we also have some don'ts.
Sure.
So some things that we have seen that people are using that they should not do. First of all, in the API, if you look into your developer console and on an object, you might see properties that are starting with underscore. Please don't use those because they are private. They are implementation details of the API. Everything that you can use is documented. It's part of the API documentation website, and it's part of the declaration file. If you get red squigglies because you're trying to use something you're not allowed to, please respect that. Those will change in the future without any notice because they're not documented. Another part, as Erik mentioned, is don't add multiple readers with subscribe calls. Most likely, if you depend on multiple values, like 3 different mod properties in order to render something, let them be part of the same subscribe, and let us handle that logic of knowing what has changed and give you all cached values and the latest of the one that has actually changed. Finally, when you have a read call and a subscribe, don't do modifications directly in that callback, because there's this problem that if you respond to a mod property and immediately modify something else, you will get undo steps. And it's easy to get into a state where you can't undo your way back because you are doing a modification based on some kind of modification. You get into a loop. So try to do modification based on user input. When you click a button, when you do a drag or a keyboard input, then you can do a modification. That's a hand of advice. But now I absolutely can share my screen and we can go over to some other kinds of mods. So I need to wait 4 seconds here because the button doesn't appear otherwise. There we go. So in this mod or this analysis, we have no page tabs. Instead, we have a mod in the top here that we can use to navigate between pages. And let's look into the code for this. Sorry. So this is an AngularJS example, and it has, as all mods, an index.html page. And in AngularJS, it's common that you write your templates in HTML, and Angular is used to connect some kind of dynamic data into the HTML and render some form of UI. So in this code, we have a body tag with an ng controller, which is Angular language for connecting some form of JavaScript controller called pages controller and bind it to a variable called control. And we have an unordered list, and we have one li tag, a list element, which we have an ng repeat here. So for each page in this control.pages list, we render a page name, and we hide it if it's not visible, and we set it as active when you click it. And this is what you see in this example. We have some form of shadow on the active page, and when we click, we go to that page. The code behind it is a JavaScript page or file where we initialize the mod API, and we set up a reader for the document pages. So it's a collection of all pages in the document, and also the currently active page. And inside this render once, which we use for setup, we create what's called an Angular controller. And this is the same name as you saw in the index.html page. And this controller, we have a variable called pages, which is the list of pages that we have read from the mod API. We also store the active page, and then we set up a subscribe call for any updates to that collection. And after that, it's up to Angular to actually do the updates in the UI. So the mod only sets variables to this controller, and our rendering library, in this case AngularJS, is updating the UI when this changes. So let's go over to document property here instead. And the common pattern for all of these examples that I will show you is that you can use any UI library that you want and use it to render some from a UI. And then this mod API is used to retrieve some data, and this special code for the mod is doing that glue between Spotfire and the UI that you are rendering. So in this case, we have the glue here is reading data from the mod and placing it into this controller, which is plain Angular. So the mod code itself, which is really connected to the mod API, is fairly small here. We have another example, which is this quiet little mod, which is a drop-down, which we can select all document properties in the current analysis. We can pick the description, our Dr. Spotfire here. And when this document property changes, we will switch to another page in the analysis. I'll pick the animated bubble chart. And as it happens, since we're in the web player, we can't edit the document properties. We don't have any UI for that. So let's use this mod instead, which we can use to select, once again, document properties in our UI. And let's use Dr. Spotfire and change the value. And click outside. And that other mod that just listens to that document property saw that it had updated, and it did its task. It switched to another page. And both of these mods are based on React, which is just another UI library that you can use. So let's take a look at the React demo.
So just real quick before we jump away from there, going back to Spotfire. So the significance of this, just to highlight this for the audience, is look, you can create controls in Spotfire already in the analyst. You can use IronPython to do certain actions, but one of the great things about this is one, it doesn't use IronPython, so it's actually friendly for the TIBCO cloud, where the IronPython can't be used in the web. So it doesn't use IronPython. And two, you can make a lot of complicated and complex actions, sophisticated actions, and this can just be reproducible like a mod, right, Olof? Like if you wanted to talk about that, like you could just drag and drop this instead of having to reconfigure in every new DXP or in every new page a new text area and new controls and new scripts, right? It's just drag and drop it in, right?
Yes. So the page control here, for example, which is just another way of showing the pages in the document. It's a single instance of the mod. It can be stored in the library. If your UI style changes, you update it in a single place, and all places that import that mod, they will be updated with it. So yes, the power of mod is that it can be used in all of our contexts, which we allow: cloud, on-prem, enterprise environments, mobile, and analyst client. So sure, it's a simple demo here that we are reading a document property and switching page, but you can imagine that you can do something more difficult or interesting that is suitable for your expertise of area.
Yeah, and I often see with our customers, they'll have corporate standards, and they might have a certain layout at the top with certain controls and links to other like parts of their internal portals or certain actions. You can have that standardized. You can build a mod for that, and you can just drag that and drop that into every page. I've also seen some type of analyses, like there might be a lot of repeated analyses that you're doing with different data or slightly different data and having to rebuild things in different DXPs. Well, that's another thing you could just do into a mod, is just have the mod do the actions and and there you don't have to redo the analysis setup every time.
Absolutely. So mods are mainly built for visualizations, but they can definitely be used in application building as well. Yes, so the React example, it's based on TypeScript in this case. So in what Erik talked about earlier about using types, we can just quickly look here in the JavaScript example. So here we're using the Spotfire.mod as a JSDoc type parameter. So this is still JavaScript, but we can use this to get type information about our mods, which makes it possible to get red squigglies when we do typos. Who hasn't done a typo in JavaScript? It's a little bit too easy to do. So let's move runtime errors into just typos, and we can easily fix them. But in this React example, we have a mod which has a reader of all properties in the document. So document properties, all pages. And then we have two mod properties to keep in state inside of this mod. One is for storing the name of the property that we are interested in, and one is for storing the name of the page that we are interested in. A mod itself can't store state in local storage or cookies because it's sandboxed. So you need to store everything that you want to persist in the document in a mod property. And mod properties also give you undo and redo, which is very useful. And in our render call, we have our properties and pages, current property and the current page. We use React DOM render into some kind of app component, which is the way React is built upon. And the app itself, if we navigate to it, is in app.tsx. It has a div, and inside of it, we have a drop-down component with some on-click handlers. And the important thing here is that the only thing this code knows about the mod API is some kind of type information. And that could have been generalized as well. So the rendering code here has no idea about what the mod API is. It only has variables, what is shown in the dropdown, and what is happening when you click on the dropdown. So you can make that layer of the glue between Spotfire and your UI very thin, which is contained right now in this main.tsx. And I think it's a fairly nice pattern that you try to separate what is general, what is your UI and might be reused in another context, and what is very specific to Spotfire, that glue between the mod API and your visualization. Those were my demos.
Get a little bit more. So we are, I mentioned this last time, we are working on putting together some curriculums and some more content around Spotfire mods. We know this is a lot to digest. There's a lot going on. We wanted to go ahead and release Spotfire mods, get feedback from the community, and start, using things in practice and then build some content around that. So in the coming months and weeks, you'll start to see more community pages. You'll start to see hackathons, and we're calling them modathons, and competitions for doing mods, and working on curriculums and things like that. So I put this link to the Spotfire mods overview in the community or in the Zoom chat. And if you scroll down, you will see the exchange, and you'll also see a link to the GitHub page. So the GitHub page has a lot of documentation and pretty much everything you need as a developer with mods. The community exchange is useful for just downloading a pre-existing mod. So this is pre-filtered to Spotfire mods, and you can get the animated bubble chart from today, the area chart Andrew showed last time. So there's more and more custom visualizations that are starting to pop up in our exchange. With that, I just wanted to say thank you again to Erik and Olof for this great presentation. I hope the audience was able to extract all these things out of your brain. I try to extract everything I could out of your brain. There's a lot of great information in there. Love having you, and hopefully we can have you again sometime. And to our audience, thank you again for joining. And next time we will be doing Excel tips in Spotfire, Microsoft Excel tips for Spotfire. Thanks, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.